It's time for us to start animating the character. How do we do that? Well, we go to the content browser and let's have a look at what we have. Right now we have the character, we have physics asset, skeleton, and textures. Okay? Now, first off, I'm going to get this character and the character skeleton, and I'm going to rename this to be it's going to be sk underscore night girl. I just want everything to be consistent, so I'm going to make this skeleton underscore night girl. Sorry, force a habit. sk underscore night girl will be the mesh itself. So the mesh is sk night girl. The skeleton is skeleton underscore night girl, and the physics asset is going to be phys underscore night girl. Okay, so we've got some simplified names here that I know I can work with. So the next thing for us to do is to actually import the animations. So I'm going to go back to this resource folder, and you'll see that we have a bunch of different things here. Anything that is preceded by player underscore is an animation. So drag and select all of those. As well as that, we have swing 1, swing 2, and victory. So I'm going to get all of those, and I'm then going to import them. Drag them in. Now, as it goes to import, it's going to go, hey, these are all animations, what do I do? And I'm going to be like, apply it to that skeleton. I'm going to hold it over for a little bit longer. There we go. Now, it's going to say, what should I do? And I say, well, please do me a favor and use the night girl skeleton. And it's going to go, cool. Great. So these are our animations. Let's open one up. Ta-da! So she works. Now, it's worth going into this. Within Unreal, one of the main points of confusion when people first get involved with the animation system is that they have animation sequences, which is what each of these is, which is the raw imported animation, and then there's animation montages. Now, to begin with, we're going to be working with sequences, but very quickly we're going to work our way into montages. And montages are essentially your way of setting up entire extra layers of information on top of animations. So montages can have a whole lot of stuff built on top of them, and I'm going to show you what that is when we get to them. I just want you to be aware that if you see the two, they are definitely different things, and they are not entirely interchangeable. So I've got all of these assets. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to make sure that everything is saved. So I'm going to click Save All. And now from here, I'm going to right click and I'm going to create something different. I'm going to create an animation blueprint. So under animation, there's animation blueprint. And it's going to say, well, what do you want to base it off of? And I'm going to say, base it off of Night Girl. AB for animation blueprint underscore night. Okay. Now when we double click on this, this is what we get. So essentially this is the anim graph. Anything that plugs into this final section here represents what we're going to have as the output that's finally playing. Okay? Now it goes well beyond that. What we essentially need to do is we need to set it up so that we have entire state machines that kind of run within this. I know this is going to sound like I'm a little bit, I'm going through things very quickly, but I assure you it'll make sense in just a moment. So the very first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what to plug into this animation pose. I'm going to right click and I'm going to type in the word state machine. And you'll see that we have add new state machine. Okay? So when we have a state machine, I'm going to hit F2 and I'm just going to call this locomotion. I'm then going to plug this into the result. And I'm then going to double click on locomotion. Now, how a state machine works is lets us set up basic animations that should play at certain times and set up the rules that are required to switch between those animations. What I mean is that if I get my entry and I drag off of this, I can add a state. And let's say this first state is called movement. Now, whenever I'm in the movement state, I have the ability to jump. So whenever I want to jump, we're going to go add state, and we're going to have what's called the jump start state. And that's going to be that section of the jump where you kind of like start tensing your legs and start going up into the air. We then have the jump mid state. So I'm going to add another state, and this is going to be called jump mid. Now, if I were to have a jump mid state, it would be the section where I'm kind of like flailing my arms in the air and just falling. And finally, we would have another state which represents the landing state. Okay? Now the landing state is then going to plug straight back into movement, and I would be able to land and go back into an idle or a movement position. So that's how a state machine would work, and you'll notice that on each of these I have this little section that highlights itself. Do you see this little node? This represents the transition, and these can be one-way or two-way. For instance, if there was some way to go from jump state back into movement, I could have the jump state connecting back to it that way. So I've plugged this in, but I actually don't want that, so I'm going to delete that one. So it's all one way and we go around. But let's first look at what the movement state is. So I'm going to double click on that. Essentially, when we're in the movement state, which is our very first state, we're going to have something plugging into this. So this is going to be what we do whenever we're in the movement state. Now, if you think about what happens when we move, we essentially have a situation where we have to calculate how fast we're moving forwards or how fast we're moving to the side, and then blend animations of our forward running cycle with our strafing running cycles and work out what the final blend would look like. And what I mean by that is, imagine from a top-down perspective someone running forwards, okay? Now, if you wanted them to run forwards and to the right, you wouldn't want to have to make an animation that was both of those things, okay? What you would want to do is create an animation for forwards and an animation for right, and let the game work out how to blend those two animations together. So how do we do that? And the answer is we create blend spaces. So I'm going to go to my content browser, and I'm going to create a blend space. And I know this is going into the deep end with animation quite quickly, but I promise you this will make sense reasonably quickly. So I'm just going to add a new blend space, and it's going to be based on my Night Girl, and it's going to be called Movement Blend Space. Now I want you to double click on that blend space, because what we're going to be doing is setting up some movement for the character so that she can blend between different animations. So to do this, what we need to do is we need to set up points within her within this graph. See, we have an X and we have a Y category. Well, what we want to do is we want to label this so that the X-axis is called right movement. And I want this to be between -200 and 200. Now my Y-axis label is going to be called forward movement. And it's going to be between, you guessed it, -200 and 200. I'm also going to set the number of divisions as 8 for both of these and hit apply. And you now see that this is forward movement and this is right movement. So keep in mind that negative right movement is left movement and negative forward movement is backwards movement. Okay? So what we do from here is we simply drop in the correct animation that should apply to the amount of that thing that you're doing at any one stage. So what I mean by that is, let's say I'm moving forward at full speed, so at 200 units per second. If that were the case, I would be doing a sprint. So I'm going to drag in the sprint node and pop it right there. Okay? So you can see that she's going to be doing that up there. Now we only have one node on its lonesome right now, so let's add a little bit more. Next I'm going to add an idle movement. Okay? So I'm going to go to here and I'm going to look for the idle animation. Idle, relaxed. And I'm just going to drop that in. And now, if we were to blend between these, you would notice that, oh, that was a good trick. So at the moment when I managed to swap those two nodes around somehow. So I'm just going to drag that to there. Somehow I managed to drop my sprint node down there and my idle up top. But that's okay. So when I'm at 0 movement, I'm this, and then as I start moving forward, it's going to start blending between those until I'm at full sprint. Do you see that? But the truth is that halfway is not going to be full sprint. Halfway is going to be the regular run forward. So to do that, I do forward movement, and you'll notice that we have player run forward. So I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to connect that to about the 1 meter mark. So between here and here, and then between run and sprint. So see how now she'll like pitch herself forward depending? But we can do much more than this. Let's now set up the sideways running movements. So to do that, what I need to do is I'm going to add run right. And I'm going to drop that here. There we go. Run right. And the next thing I'm going to do is add the opposite to that, which is going to be run lefts. Does that make sense? We're going to now have backwards. So run backward is going to be all the way down here. Okay. And the other thing I'm going to do is if we're angling while running forward, I actually want to add an extra blend that's going to be run right and run left, just up to there. So I'm going to get run right and put it here, and the lefts and put it up here. And it might look a little odd here, so potentially I might want to actually move it back to about there. But I'm sure we can work out where that would be in a little bit. So I'm just grabbing these and kind of dropping them down. So full sprint would mean that I was here, and as I moved across, she would start angling her legs a little bit to the left and right. Okay? So that's our blend space, and I'm now going to go back to my blueprint. And for this animation, I'm just simply going to add the movement blend space that we just created, blend space player. And when I plug this in, it's going to say to me, there we go, compile, save. Now it's going to say, well, what's your right movement and what's your forward movement? So we need to work out how we want to get that. Now this is where the event graph comes in. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we can create variables that are stored in our animation blueprint, okay? So to do that, all I need to do is go to the event graph and set up a variable down here. And this first variable that we create is just going to be called local velocity. I'm going to set it to a vector. Now, much like a normal blueprint that has tick, we're going to use update animation in an AnimBP. And all we do here is very simple. We go check the animation and see if there is a pawn that owns it. And if there is, so drag off that. I'm going to check if it's valid. If there is a pawn, what we want to do is get its velocity and set it to something. Now, if I was to get the pawn and I was to get the velocity of it, this is unfortunately not going to be in local space. It'll be in world space. So what I need to do is translate this from being where it's moving in the world to its forward and right speeds, okay? And to do that, I need to run an inverse transform direction, which we used before in that force movement volume, you may remember. And finally, I need to just plug into this a transform of the pawn. So I'm going to get this, I'm going to type in transform, and I'm going to get the actor's transform, and just plug that straight into here. I'm then going to plug this into local velocity, and that's all you need. Compile, save. So that's set up. If you're wondering what these compiler errors are, it's because it doesn't know how to do any jumping or anything like that right now. We'll cover that in just a bit. So, movement blend space, I'm going to get my local velocity. I'm going to split the pin. Now X is forward, Y is sideways, so I'm simply just going to plug this into right movement and forward movement. Now if we wanted to test this, we can actually just punch in numbers ourselves. So I can click on the variable and say, hey, it's moving at 200 and see what it looks like. 100, 0. But we can do better than that. Compile, save. I'm going to go back to locomotion. This is all set up. So I'm going to go back to my anim graph and make sure that's also set up. It's definitely plugged in, which means, in theory, if I was to go to my controller, which is character base, sorry, not my controller, my character, and I was to set the character movement, sorry, the mesh animation blueprint to be my night girl. So I'm in character base, animation blueprint, night girl, compile, save, and then I was to hit play and watch her. She's now going to run. And if she were to strafe, she would correctly strafe. So that's the basics of getting the initial section of movement going. Simple, huh? So next up, we're going to expand on this system and add the jump cycle in there. As well as that, we're then going to move into some more interesting animations.